They called me crazy for digging into this rock while the valley stayed dry. Now the wells have failed, and the men who laughed are walking up my road with empty jugs.
He bought 3 acres of rocky ground nobody else wanted. Then he started digging, deeper, wider, stranger than anything Crawford Valley had ever seen. The town called him crazy, called him the ditch veteran, called the holes graves for a man already dead. Jax Harlan said nothing. He had served 12 years overseas, lost his wife, lost his home, lost everything but the German shepherd at his side. Smokey watched the men who laughed. She remembered every face. Then the drought came, the wells failed, the taps ran dry, and one morning, the men who had laughed walked up his gravel road carrying empty jugs. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. The cold inside the concrete block cabin had its own weight, settling between Jax Harlan's ribs the way river silt settles into the bottom of a stilled current, slow and final and refusing to move. He woke at 4:17 in the morning, the way he had woken every morning for the last 682 days, with his eyes opening on the dark before his mind agreed to follow, his body already counting the small clean facts that told him where he was. Tin roof above, single bare bulb hanging from a length of 12-gauge wire, wood stove 3 steps to his left, banked low with juniper coals that had burned themselves down to a dull red constellation. Cot frame beneath him salvaged from an old Forest Service bunkhouse he had bought for $40 off a man in Burns, sleeping bag rated to 20 below, zipped to his chin, Smokey on her own cot at the foot of his, her breathing slow and even and exactly counted. He could find her in the dark by the sound of her alone, the way some men find the door of their own house by the smell of the wood it was built from. He did not move yet, he never did. The first minute of the day belonged to inventory. Hands, feet, the shoulder that had taken the shrapnel and still ached when the barometric pressure dropped, the lower back, the teeth he had cracked from grinding through 3 deployments, the breath, which was the part of him he watched the most carefully, because his breath was the part of him most likely to lie. Smokey's tail thumped the canvas of her cot exactly once. She knew he was awake before he did. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and gun oil, and the faint mineral dust that had been sifting in from the valley floor since the wind shifted 3 nights ago. Outside the single salvaged window above the stove, the high desert was still as a held breath, and the stars over Crawford Valley were so clear and so cold they seemed less like light than like small punctures in a black canvas through which the absolute zero of space was leaking down onto the basalt. He swung his legs out of the bag and set both bare feet flat on the concrete slab he had poured himself the previous spring. The cold went up through his soles into his shins like a wire being drawn. He counted to 10 the way he counted everything that hurt and was supposed to hurt. Then he stood. Smokey stood with him. She did not need to be called. She never had. He fed 2 pieces of split juniper into the stove and watched the dry red coals catch the fresh wood and bloom into a yellow-orange light that crawled up the cast-iron walls of the firebox. The cabin warmed 1/2 degree. He filled the small enamel pot from the 5-gallon water jug on the counter, set the pot on the stovetop, and reached for the tin can that held his coffee. Folgers, the cheap red kind. He had drunk better coffee in Kandahar from a pot a Marine cook had nursed for 3 days, and worse coffee in his own kitchen the morning he had come home from Walter Reed and found the kitchen no longer his. The thought came up the way it always did, without permission, riding the smell of the coffee. He shut it down by counting Smokey's breathing. 8 breaths. Steady. Deep. The dog beside him was alive. He was alive. The cabin was warm. The water in the pot was beginning to whisper. These were the facts. He stood inside the facts, the way a man stands inside a narrow doorway during an earthquake. When the coffee was ready, he poured it black into the same tin cup he had carried in 3 different rucks across 2 different countries, and he opened the cabin door and stepped out into the dark. The cold was different outside, it had teeth. The temperature on the small thermometer nailed to the porch post read 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and the dry air pulled the moisture out of the corners of his eyes within seconds, leaving the lashes stiff. The Milky Way was a thrown handful of salt across the black bowl above. He could hear nothing for a long moment except the creak of the porch boards under his boots and the soft pad of Smokey's nails on the wood beside him. And then, far down the valley, the single far-off bark of a coyote, answering another coyote across 2 miles of sagebrush. He stood on the porch and drank his coffee, and looked east at the line of basalt rim where the dawn would come in another hour and a quarter. The land sloped away from the cabin in a long shallow draw toward the dry creek bed at the bottom of the property. 3 acres, 450 feet of frontage on a county road that ran nowhere anyone wanted to go. The man who had sold him the parcel in the spring of the year before last had laughed in his face when Jax had counted out cash on the hood of the realtor's car. "Mister," the man had said, "you are buying ground that won't grow a stick of sage without a fight. There is no well. There has never been a well. The water table on this stretch of bench is 140 feet down, and the rock between you and it will eat a drill bit a week. Anybody on this side of the road who tells you different is lying or selling." Jax had nodded and signed and bought it for $9,400 cash, which was nearly all the money he had left in the world after the lawyer in Vancouver had taken his cut for the divorce and the bank in Spokane had taken what was left of the savings account that Carla had not already drained. He had bought it because it was cheap and because no one else wanted it, and because a man sleeping in his truck in the parking lot of a Walmart in Bend, Oregon, with a German shepherd who was not allowed inside any motel within 200 miles, learns to want only what the world has decided is worthless. He drained the cup. The coffee was gone. The east was still black. He set the cup down on the porch rail and walked around the side of the cabin with Smokey at heel, down the path he had worn into the dirt over 14 months of digging, and stopped at the lip of the 3rd cistern. Even in the dark he knew its shape by heart: 40 feet long, 24 feet wide, 16 feet deep at the deep end where the inlet pipes would terminate. Concrete walls 8 inches thick poured in 3 lifts over a single ferocious week the previous October when he had not slept more than 4 hours a night, and Smokey had not left his side. The interior was sealed with a marine-grade epoxy he had bought wholesale from a man in Klamath Falls who had once been a Navy diver. The roof would be a domed arch of poured concrete tied into rebar he had bent himself, with a manhole at one end and a screened overflow at the other. When it was finished, this single tank would hold 72,000 gallons of clean water. It would be the 3rd of 4. Together they would hold just over 250,000 gallons. 250,000 gallons of water in the high desert was not a hole in the ground. It was a small lake hidden under a man's land. It was the difference between living and not living. It was the difference between a man who could be moved off his ground and a man who could not. He stood at the lip and looked down into the dark of the unfinished tank. And Smokey stood beside him and looked down into it too, and her tail moved once against the back of his calf the way it did when she was checking on him without making him feel checked on. He breathed once, deep, slow. The first grey was beginning to come up over the rim. He went back inside, set down his cup, sat on the edge of the cot, and reached under it for the green metal footlocker that had followed him from Fort Bragg to Bagram, to Kandahar, to Walter Reed, and finally to this cabin, on a piece of useless ground in Crawford Valley, eastern Oregon. He worked the combination by feel. He lifted the lid. The smell that came up was canvas and gun oil and old paper, and the faint sweet rot of cordura webbing that had been wet and dried too many times to ever fully forgive the world. He did not have to dig for the letter. He knew where it was. Top tray, right side folded twice. Manila envelope from the law office of Hennessy and Burke, Vancouver, Washington, postmarked February 11th, addressed to him at the Wounded Warrior Unit at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland. He did not unfold it. He had not unfolded it in 8 months. He did not need to. He knew what it said. The words had been burned into the soft paper at the back of his skull the first time he had read them, sitting in a wheelchair in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and bad coffee, with the sergeant from the JAG office standing 2 steps away, looking at his own boots so as to give Jax the courtesy of not seeing his face. Notice of dissolution. Notice of quitclaim. Notice of full and final distribution of marital assets pursuant to the default judgment entered in the Superior Court of Clark County, Washington, on the 23rd day of January. the wife having borne the burden of the action in absence of the respondent being unreachable for service due to active duty deployment and subsequent medical evacuation and convalescence. Translated, she had filed while he was overseas. The court had ruled while he was unconscious in a German hospital. She had taken the house, she had taken the truck, she had taken the savings, she had taken the dog they had bought together before he had ever met Smokey, she had taken the photographs. The respondent had borne the action in absence. The respondent had nothing to come home to. The man who became Carla's second husband had moved into the bedroom. Jax had repainted himself the leave before his last deployment. He was a regional manager for a chain of auto parts stores. His name was Bryce. He had a low resting heart rate and excellent dental insurance. Jax had read the letter 3 times. Then he had folded it. Then he had put it in his footlocker. Then he had stopped speaking for 9 days. Smokey had not stopped speaking. She had said everything that needed to be said by laying her muzzle across his thigh, and by refusing food when he refused food, and by walking out of the dining hall behind him with a quiet, steady grace that had made even the orderlies stop and step out of the way. He closed the footlocker now. He locked it. He pushed it back under the cot. He needed cement. 40 bags. Portland Type 1. The cisterns demanded what they demanded. The drive into town was 11 miles of 2-lane blacktop that ran along the lip of the valley before dropping down into the long flat of the Crawford River drainage. The sun came up halfway in. The light was that hard, dry eastern Oregon light that made the dust stand up on the shoulders like spun gold and made every rock cast a shadow longer than the rock itself. Smokey rode in the passenger seat with her head turned to the window, watching the world go past with the absolute patient attention of a creature who had once been paid to notice things that meant the difference between living and dying. The fingers of his right hand rested on the back of her neck under the thick black fur of her ruff. Crawford was 983 souls on the last census. A feed store, a diner, a Chevron, a small county courthouse with a pressed tin ceiling, a Methodist church, a Catholic church that shared its priest with a parish 2 valleys over, a bar called the Mule, a hardware store annexed to the feed store, and a Forest Service office with a flag that had been replaced 8 times in 15 years because the wind off the rim chewed the polyester apart faster than the budget could replace it. Callaway Feed and Hardware sat on the south end of Main with a yellow tin sign, and a row of pickup trucks parked nose-in to the wooden sidewalk. The trucks were mostly Fords and mostly the same colour of dust. He pulled in at the end of the row, killed the engine, and sat for the count of 10. Smokey watched him. He nodded to her. She unfolded herself from the seat with the slow precision of a creature who had been hit by an explosion once and never moved carelessly again, and she dropped down to the gravel beside the truck and stood and waited. Inside, the bell over the door clattered. The smell hit first. Hay, leather, kerosene, the faint sweet ammonia of feed sacks, machine oil. Mort Callaway was behind the counter the way Mort Callaway had been behind that counter for 31 years. A square man of 62, with a face like a ham left out in the sun. He looked up as Jax came in, then looked back down at his ledger without speaking. The 2 men by the wood stove did not look down. They looked up. They were Roy Petrie and a younger man Jax did not know by name but knew by face. A man who worked seasonal cattle for the big Stillwell place out on the far side of the rim. Roy was holding a tin cup of free Callaway coffee. The younger man was holding a bear claw in a wax paper sleeve. Roy spoke first, the way Roy always did. "Well, now," he said, "look who has come up out of his hole to breathe." Jax walked past them to the cement aisle. The younger man laughed, the way a man laughs who is trying out the laugh of an older man he wants to be liked by. Roy laughed with him, and the laugh that came up from the 2 of them was a thin, sour laugh that did not have its full weight behind it because Mort Callaway was in the room, and Mort Callaway had not yet given them permission to laugh fully. 40 bags, Jax said, when he came back to the counter. Portland Type 1. Loaded. Mort wrote the number on the ledger without looking up. Got a 6-bag minimum on the loader today. he said. Pallets down to 38. I can get you the rest by Tuesday. Tuesday is fine. Mort wrote the date. Roy watched from the wood stove. He was a man who could not bear to be ignored. He was also a man who had been at the original purchase of Jax's 3 acres, because Roy had been the man whose father had owned the land before the man who sold it to Jax, and Roy had carried for 19 months a grudge of the particular kind that a man carries when he thinks somebody else is making a fool of him by buying a thing he himself sold for nothing. "How is the digging coming?" he said. "Halfway to China yet." Jax counted out the cash on the counter. 1, 2, 3. The younger man laughed. Mort Calloway did not laugh. Mort Calloway was a hard man and not a kind one. But Mort Calloway had once driven a fuel truck in the 1st Cavalry Division between Pleiku and Anakaye in 1968, and Mort Calloway, even when he did not like a man, had a particular small mercy for the silence of a man who had carried a rifle for the United States, in a war that had ended with that man being mocked by people who had not. 4, 5, 6. You know, Roy said, to no one in particular and to everyone at once. I drove past your place on Saturday. Couldn't see a damn thing. Just dirt. Mountains of dirt. I told my wife, I said, that boy is digging his own grave on 3 acres and saving the county the trouble of a backhoe. 7, 8. The younger man laughed harder. Mort Calloway said, that's enough. Roy held up his hands. Just an observation, he said. Just an observation. Mort. Jax counted out the rest of the money. $63.87. He set it on the counter. Mort took it, made change, slid 2 pennies and a dime back across the wood. Tuesday, Mort said. Tuesday, Jax said. He turned to walk out. Roy was still holding his tin cup and his thin, sour grin. The younger man had taken a bite of his bear claw at the wood stove. As Jax passed, Roy spoke once more, low, almost friendly, the way men speak when they want their cruelty to be deniable. You know, they say a hole in the ground is the 2nd cheapest thing a man can buy in this country, he said. The first is a man like you. Jax did not stop. He did not turn. Smokey did not stop. She did not turn. But Smokey's right ear flicked once, the smallest movement of cartilage and skin, and her amber eye in passing found Roy Petrie's eye and held it for the duration of 3 steps, and Roy Petrie, who had run 1,000 head of cattle on this rim for 40 years, and had been kicked by a horse hard enough to shatter his femur in 2 places, and had wrestled his own ranch out of bankruptcy in 1989 with nothing but a backhoe and a will, did the thing he had not done in any of those years. He looked away first, out on the wooden sidewalk. The morning had warmed 2 degrees. Jax loaded the 8 bags of cement Mort's son had stacked on the loader into the bed of the truck and tied a tarp down over them. He climbed in. Smokey was already in the passenger seat. He started the engine and pulled out of the lot. A logging truck went past on Main Street, long-bedded, empty, returning to the woods. Its air brakes hissed once, and then hissed again, and then hit the 3rd hiss, which was the one with the high-frequency metallic punctuation at the end of it, and the world inside Jax's chest tightened the way a wet rope tightens when it dries. The smell of diesel. The hiss of pneumatics. A gate at the front of a forward operating base outside Sangin, Helmand Province, the September of his last deployment, opening to let a fuel convoy roll out at 0400. The smell of diesel and the hiss of brakes and the radio in his earpiece saying something he could not now remember, and the next thing he could remember was the inside of a hospital ceiling in Germany 17 days later. His hands were on the wheel. His hands were on the wheel. Smokey's head came across the console without any signal he had given her, and she laid her muzzle on the top of his right thigh and pressed down with the small calibrated weight that was her version of a hand on his shoulder, and he counted her breathing, and he counted his own breathing, and he counted to 12. By the time he counted to 12, the logging truck was past. The air brakes were silent. The smell of diesel was thinning into the dry desert wind. And he was on the long 2-lane blacktop running back up the rim toward the cabin. He drove home with the windows half down and his right hand on the back of Smokey's neck, and he did not stop until he reached the gate of his own 3 acres of useless ground. And he sat in the truck inside his own gate for a full 2 minutes before he opened the door and got out and went to begin the work of the afternoon. The 3rd cistern still needed to be sealed. The 4th still had to be marked out. Winter was coming. Winter was always coming. A man in his condition knew that better than a man not in his condition. The world had a way of going dry, and then, without warning, going wet, and then, without further warning, going dry again. And the only thing a soldier could do was build something beneath the ground that the world could not see, because what the world could not see, the world could not take. That night, the wind shifted, and the clouds came up over the Steens far to the south. And Jack stood on his porch with his coffee cooling in his hand and watched the sunset bleed red and copper across the basalt rim of the valley. Smokey stood beside him, her shoulder against his thigh, her ears forward, her amber eyes catching the dying light. He did not speak. There was no one to speak to. The valley below them began to disappear into blue evening. A single light came on in a farmhouse far down the draw. Then another. Then another. Crawford was gathering itself for the night. A man with nothing and a dog who had nothing stood at the lip of a hole he had dug himself, and waited for the rain that the radio said was not coming. The radio in the truck cab was a 1994 Delco that had come stock with the F-250 and had been replaced once badly by a previous owner with an aftermarket unit that drifted off station every time the road dipped below 3,800 feet of elevation. Jax kept it tuned to the AM band 1190, the Crawford County station out of John Day that played classic country in the morning, and farm reports at noon and a Catholic Mass at 6 o'clock on Sundays for the old Basque sheep ranchers who still came down from the rim to listen. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the announcement came. He had picked up the rest of the cement at Callaway's and was driving the 11 miles back up to the rim with 32 bags of Portland Type 1 in the bed and the tarp tied down at all 4 corners. The DJ broke off the second verse of a Merle Haggard song to read a public service notice from the Crawford County Board of Commissioners. Effective immediately. The man read in a voice that was trying very hard to sound calm. The Crawford County Board of Commissioners has declared a Stage 3 water emergency for the unincorporated portions of the county and the city of Crawford. Outdoor watering is prohibited. Landscape irrigation is prohibited. Vehicle washing at private residences is prohibited. The county has authorized the city to begin metered distribution from the municipal spigot in Veterans Park between the hours of 6 in the morning and 8 in the evening, with a per-household limit of 100 gallons per day for residents who can document a primary residence within the city limits, and 50 gallons per day for residents on private wells in the surrounding rural areas. The Department of Water Resources has confirmed that the snowpack in the Upper Crawford watershed measured 4% of historical average on the 1st of April. The Drought Monitor has placed Crawford County in the D4 classification, the highest classification for exceptional drought, for the first time in recorded history. Residents are advised to... The signal drifted. The DJ's voice fragmented into static. The Merle Haggard song did not come back. Jax reached over and turned the radio off. Beside him, Smokey's head was up. Her ears had gone forward at the word emergency, the way they always did at certain words spoken in a certain tone, and they had not gone back. He drove the rest of the way home in silence. The sky over the rim was the kind of high, empty blue that meant nothing was coming for at least another month. He had been watching that sky for 3 years. He had read the long-range forecasts every Sunday morning at the Forest Service office, where they let him use the computer because the librarian's son had served in the same brigade. He had known what was coming since November. The cisterns were the answer to a question he had been the only man in Crawford County asking out loud. He stayed on his land for 2 days. He sealed the 3rd cistern by lantern. He bent rebar for the dome. He let Smokey sleep against the small of his back when the cold woke him up at 3 in the morning, and the wind off the rim was making the cabin's tin roof tick like a slow clock counting something that did not have a name. On the third day, he went into town for diesel for the generator that ran his shop welder. He did not need much. 5 gallons. He pulled into the Chevron at the corner of Main and Sycamore and was filling his red plastic jerry can at the pump when he saw her for the first time. She was walking on the gravel shoulder of County Road 14 on the far side of the highway, a woman of 70 or thereabouts, in a faded green field jacket that hung past her hips and looked 2 sizes too large for her, and a pair of canvas pants that had been a man's pants once and had been taken in at the waist by a hand that knew how to take in canvas. Her grey hair was pulled back into a knot at the nape of her neck. She was carrying 2 empty plastic milk jugs by the handles, one in each hand. She walked with the deliberate, even pace of a person who had calculated exactly how much energy she had for the trip and was rationing it step by step. He watched her over the top of the gas pump. She passed the front of the Chevron at the slow, even pace, and she did not turn her head, and she did not stop. Her face was set in the particular composed arrangement that older women in country towns wear when they have decided that whatever they are doing is none of anyone else's business, and they are not going to give anyone the satisfaction of being seen needing help. She kept walking. She crossed at the corner. She turned up the alley behind the diner. She disappeared. The pump clicked off at 5 gallons. Jack screwed the cap onto the jerry can. He stood with his hand on the cap for a long second. Smokey, in the passenger seat with the window down, was watching the place in the alley where the woman had vanished, and the dog's amber eye had the absolute fixed focus that the dog only ever wore for one of 2 things, a soldier or a wounded thing. He paid inside. He put the can in the bed. He drove the truck up to the corner of Main and stopped at the 4-way and looked left. The alley behind the diner was empty. He turned right and went home. He did not see her on the way. He did not look for her on the way. He told himself he did not look for her. He told himself a great many things during the 11-mile drive up the rim, and Smokey lay across the bench seat with her chin on his thigh, and did not say any of the things back to him that she would have said if she had been a creature who used words. The next morning he went back into town. He told himself he needed 8 pieces of 1/2-inch rebar from Callaway's. Although he had 8 pieces of 1/2-inch rebar in his shop, he told himself he needed to check the post office box he had not used in 2 months. He told himself the cabin felt small that morning, although the cabin always felt the same. Smokey got into the truck without being asked. He parked across the street from Veterans Park at 9:15. The municipal spigot had been put up the previous evening, a single tap at the end of a red-painted iron-stand pipe set in the southwest corner of the park near the small concrete picnic table that had been donated by the American Legion in 1981. A line of perhaps 14 people stood at the spigot, old men, 2 younger women with children at their hips, a man in a wheelchair with a 5-gallon igloo cooler in his lap, a teenager in a Future Farmers of America jacket holding 2 5-gallon buckets. The line was orderly. The line was silent. She was the 8th in line. The same field jacket. The same canvas pants. The same grey knot of hair. She was holding the same 2 plastic milk jugs. Across the street at the diner, 3 men sat at the window booth with their coffee cups in front of them and their newspapers folded on the table, and they did not look out at the line. They had decided not to see it. The line was a thing the diner did not see. The diner saw its own coffee. The diner saw its own newspaper. The diner saw the salt and pepper shakers it had set out at 5:30 that morning. The line at the spigot in the park was a thing that was happening on the other side of glass that the diner had decided was a wall. Jax did not get out of the truck. He sat in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel. Smokey sat in the passenger seat with her shoulder against the door panel and her ears forward and her amber eyes on the woman in the field jacket. The dog's tail did not move. Her breathing had slowed to a count he would have called combat sleep. The deep, absolutely controlled breathing she did when she was reading a situation for threats and registering the placement of every body in her field of vision. The line moved. It moved slowly. The spigot dripped more than it ran. The pressure was bad, and the gauge on the standpipe read 41 psi, which was less than half what it had read a month before. Each person at the head of the line stood with their container under the tap for between 6 and 11 minutes. Each person filled what they had brought. Each person stepped aside, set their containers down, took up their containers again, and walked away. When she got to the head of the line, she set both jugs on the concrete pad and unscrewed the cap of the first. She placed the jug under the spigot. She held it there with both hands. The water came out in a slow, twisting, glassy rope, no thicker than a man's little finger. Her hands shook. The shaking was small and steady, and the kind of shake that did not come from cold but from something deeper, a vibration of a body that had not had enough water in it for several days. She filled the first jug. She switched to the second. The second was harder. She had to brace her right wrist with her left hand to hold the jug steady. Her shoulders were narrow under the green field jacket, and her elbows looked like they had been carved out of pine that had dried in the open weather for too many years. She filled the second jug. She screwed both caps back on. She picked up both jugs by the handles. She turned and walked away from the spigot, back across the grass of Veterans Park toward the sidewalk that led to County Road 14. The line moved up. In the truck, Smokey's tail moved once, a single thump against the upholstery. Soft, definite. Jax watched the woman cross the street and start up the long gravel shoulder. 2 full milk jugs in her hands now, 16 pounds of weight in each hand, 8 miles to wherever she was going. He started the engine. He pulled out of the angled parking spot in front of the courthouse. He drove a slow arc around the block to come up behind her on the road. He passed her at 30 miles an hour with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road ahead, the way a man passes a person he has decided not to see. He kept driving. He kept driving for half a mile. He pulled over onto the shoulder beside a stand of juniper. He sat in the truck with the engine running. In the passenger seat, Smokey turned her head and looked at him. She did not bark, she did not whine, she did not move her body. She simply turned her head and looked at him. And her amber eyes, which had been with him in 2 countries and through 3 field hospitals and across the parking lot of the lawyer's office in Vancouver, Washington. On the morning he signed the last of the papers, held his eyes for 3 full seconds. He put the truck in gear. He pulled a U-turn on the empty highway. He drove back the half-mile and pulled in behind her at idle and rolled down his window. "Ma'am," he said. She kept walking. She did not turn her head. She did not slow. He matched her pace at 5 miles an hour. "Ma'am, can I give you a ride?" She stopped. She set the jugs down on the gravel shoulder. She turned. She looked at him through the open window of the truck with eyes that were a clear, hard, particular blue, the color of cold spring water in a stainless steel cup, and she said, in a voice that was perfectly level and perfectly quiet, "No thank you, son." She picked the jugs back up. She started walking. Smokey's tail moved twice against the seat. Jax sat in the idling truck on the gravel shoulder and watched the woman walk away from him with 16 pounds of water in each hand and a green field jacket too large for her shoulders and a knot of grey hair coming loose at the back of her neck. And he counted his breathing. And Smokey counted his breathing. And after a long minute he eased the truck forward and crept along behind her at the slow walking pace. And she did not turn her head, and she did not speak, and she did not stop. He followed her like that for 2.5 miles, far enough back not to crowd her, close enough to be seen if she looked. She did not look. She walked. She set the jugs down twice, briefly, switched hands, picked them up again, kept walking. Once he saw her steady herself with her right hand against the trunk of a ponderosa pine that grew at the edge of the shoulder. The hand stayed on the bark for the count of 6, then it came down, then she walked. At the mailbox marked Briggs in white painted block letters on a green tin flag. She turned in. Jax stopped on the shoulder across from the mailbox and looked up the gravel cut. The drive ran 200 yards up a slow rise to a small white frame house, with a wraparound porch and a tin roof, and a pair of cottonwood trees that had been planted the same year the house had been built. There was a windmill in the yard that was not turning because there was no wind. There were 2 outbuildings, one a shop, one a barn, both painted a faded barn red that had gone pink in the southern exposures. The yard was dirt and gravel and dead grass, and a single shrub rose that someone had tried to keep alive with hand-watered drips and was failing to keep alive. There was an American flag in the front window of the house. The flag had hung in that window so long that the red stripes had bled to the colour of dishwater, and the white stripes had gone to the colour of weak tea, and the blue field where the stars were stitched had faded to a greyed-out powder blue that was almost the colour of the eastern sky just before dawn. There was a small brass star on the gatepost beside the mailbox. The star had been there a long time. The brass had gone green in the joints. The star meant a soldier had once lived on this ground. The woman walked up the drive. She climbed the porch steps with the jugs. She did not look back at the road. Smokey's ears were forward. Smokey's head was up. The dog's nostrils worked once, twice, 3 times in the still air, and her tail moved against the seat in the small, soft cadence that Jax had come to know as recognition without explanation. A thing the dog had sensed that he had not yet sensed. The screen door of the house opened. The woman went inside. The screen door closed behind her. Jax sat in the truck across from the mailbox for a long minute. He looked at the brass star on the gatepost. He looked at the faded flag in the window. He looked at the windmill that was not turning. He looked at the small pink shrub rose dying in the dust. He looked at his dog. Smokey looked back at him. Then she did the thing she had not done in 3 months. She put her right paw across the console and laid it on the back of his right hand on the wheel. She pressed once. She held it there. Jax turned the wheel. He pulled the truck off the shoulder. He drove the half-mile back up the road to the gravel cut at his own gate. He turned around in his own gate. He drove back. He pulled into the Briggs Drive. The truck rolled slow up the gravel toward the white frame house on the small dry farm in the long shadow of the rim. The dust came up behind it in a slow plume that hung in the dead afternoon air and did not settle. In the passenger seat, Smokey sat with her amber eyes fixed on the screen door of the house and her ears forward and her body absolutely still. And in the way the dog held herself there was a thing that Jax Harlan had only ever seen in a working dog twice in his life. And both times the thing had been the same thing, and the thing was the recognition of a soldier. Jax stopped the truck 30 feet short of the porch and shut off the engine. He sat with his hands on the wheel and counted to 10. The dust plume that had followed him up the gravel caught up with the truck and broke around the cab in a slow brown rolling wave and settled across the hood, the windshield, the long faded black of the bedliner. The valley smelled of dry sage and old wood smoke and the faint mineral chalk of a country going thirsty. He got out. He left the door open. Smokey stayed in the cab without being told. There was a 5-gallon jug of his own filtered rainwater in the bed under the tarp, beside the bags of cement. He had begun carrying one with him into town a month before, the way another man might carry a spare tire. He pulled it out, lifted it down, and walked it up the porch steps. The boards were cottonwood, grey, weathered, and one of them was beginning to soften at the seam. He set the jug on the porch boards beside the door and stepped back to the bottom of the steps. He did not knock. He did not call out. He stood at the bottom of the steps and waited. Inside the house, a clock ticked. The screen door was the kind with the small brass spring that had been adjusted by a man's hand 30 years before and never readjusted since. He could see, through the dim mesh of the screen, the inner door standing open. Past that, a narrow hallway with a small braided rug, a coat rack, a mirror in a wooden frame. The smell that came out through the screen was the smell of any old country house in the high desert. Lemon furniture polish and wood stove ash, and the particular dry cedar smell that came up from inside walls that had been built in the 1920s, with material that had been milled from trees still alive when Lincoln was a boy. The clock kept ticking. He kept waiting. After a minute and a half, the inner shadow of the hallway moved, and she came into the doorway and stood behind the screen. She had taken off the field jacket. She was wearing a man's chambray work shirt several sizes too large for her. The cuffs rolled to her elbows and the same canvas pants. Her arms were thin, her hands were thinner. The skin at the base of her throat was the kind of papery dry that meant a person had not been drinking enough water for so long that the body had begun to decide on its own which organs would be allowed to keep their share and which would not. She did not open the screen door. "I told you I did not need a ride." "Hun," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Your business and mine are not the same business." "No, ma'am." "Then what are you doing on my porch?" He glanced at the jug at his feet. 5 gallons of clean water," he said. "From my place. Filtered. Tested last month. I came past your road. I had it in the truck. It is yours if you want it." She looked at the jug. She looked at him. "I'm not a charity." "No, ma'am. I do not need looking after." "No, ma'am." "Then take your jug and go." He nodded once. He turned. He walked down the porch steps. He did not look back. He climbed into the truck. He started the engine. He backed down the gravel drive at the slow walking pace of a man who did not want to throw any more dust onto anybody's wash, and he turned out onto the county road and drove home with his right hand on the back of Smokey's neck and his left hand light on the wheel. He was 4 miles up the rim before he realized he had left the jug on her porch. He smiled, very faintly, for the first time in 3 weeks. Smokey saw the smile. The dog's tail moved once against the seat. 2 days later, he drove past the Briggs mailbox at noon on his way to Callaway's for a length of 3/4-inch galvanized pipe. And the jug was gone from the porch. 3 days after that, on a Friday. The jug was sitting empty on the gravel shoulder beside the mailbox. The cap screwed back on, the handle facing the road. He stopped. He got out. He picked it up. He set it in the bed. He drove home, refilled it from the small holding tank he had rigged under the eaves of his shop, brought it back the next morning, and set it on her porch a second time. He did not knock. He did not call out. He walked back down the steps and got in the truck and drove home. On Tuesday of the following week, she was sitting on the porch in a wooden rocking chair when he came up the drive with the 3rd refilled jug, and she did not stand and she did not speak, but she did look at him across the gravel turn with a face that was no longer a closed door, and after he had set the jug down and stepped back, she said without raising her voice, "You might as well have a cup of coffee, son. The pot has been on since 6. He looked at her. Smokey was in the truck. "Bring the dog," the woman said. "I am not afraid of dogs." Smokey came out of the truck on the small breath of a word he gave her, padded up the porch steps with the controlled grace of a working dog approaching a post, and sat at his right side facing the woman in the chair. Smokey's ears were forward. Her tail did not move. Her amber eyes held the woman's blue eyes for a full count of 4. The woman looked at the dog. She looked at Jax. She nodded. Once, slowly, the way a person nods when something has been confirmed that they had already half known. "Coffee is on the stove," she said. "Cups in the cupboard above the sink. Bring me 1 too. 2 sugars. No cream." "Yes, ma'am." He stepped through the screen door for the first time. The house inside was small, clean, lived in. A front parlour with a horsehair couch covered in a cotton throw, a cast-iron stove cold for the season, a wall of framed photographs that he did not stop to look at on his first crossing because he did not want her to feel watched. The kitchen was at the back, a green linoleum floor, a white enamel sink, a 4-burner gas stove with an aluminum percolator on the back left burner that had been on a low blue flame for at least an hour. On the small table by the window was a single blue china cup with a chipped saucer. On the counter beside the bread box was a folded sheet of yellow legal paper with a county seal at the top, the kind of notice that was mailed to the rural box of every property owner in Crawford County when something in the world was about to change for them, whether they liked it or not. He poured 2 cups. He carried them both back out. He set hers on the small table at her elbow. 2 sugars, no cream. The spoon in the saucer. He sat on the porch step. Smokey lay down at his right knee. The woman stirred her coffee. She lifted the cup. She did not drink yet. She looked out across the dirt yard at the dead shrub rows and the silent windmill and the long shadow of the rim falling east. "Briggs," she said. "Eleanor Briggs. I have lived on this place 41 years. Jack's Harlan," he said. 3 acres up the rim road. "I know who you are," she said. "The whole valley knows who you are. They have not stopped talking about you since the day you came." He nodded. He did not say anything. She drank from the cup. Finally, a small, careful sip. The cup shook a little in her hand. She set it down. "Do they tell you what they say?" she said. "I do not ask," he said. "That is the right answer," she said. The wind moved through the cottonwoods in the yard. The leaves were small still, the new spring leaves, and they whispered in the dry air the way cottonwoods do, like a stream a long way off behind a stand of trees. "You have been bringing water," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He looked at the dust on his boots. He looked at the dead rose. He looked, finally, at her hands on the arms of the rocking chair, the knuckles, the wedding ring still on the 3rd finger of the left hand. The way the ring had been worn in along the bone, over decades until the bone and the ring had become the same single shape. "I drove past," he said. "I had it in the truck. You drive past every day," she said. "It is the way to town." "Yes, ma'am." She did not press him. She let the answer sit. After a long minute she said, "My husband fought in 2 wars. The first one he came home from. The second one he came home from but did not come back from. There is a difference. Do you know what I mean?" "Yes, ma'am." "I thought you would. I have been watching you walk through Crawford for 2 years. You walk like a man who has come home but did not come back." He did not answer. She drank her coffee. "I do not need a charity, hun. Not from the county and not from a stranger. But I will take a cup of coffee on my own porch from a man who has been bringing water to a widow without asking her to thank him. That is not charity. That is something else. That is what neighbours used to be." He nodded. "What is on your kitchen counter?" he said. She looked at him. "The county notice," he said. "The yellow paper." Her mouth moved at the corner. Not quite a smile. The small wry adjustment of a woman who had read a great many county notices in her life. "Emergency ordinance hearing," she said. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the courthouse. Private water collection regulation. The county wants permits and inspections on any cistern over 500 gallons. The county wants a per-acre cap on water storage for unincorporated parcels. The county wants the right of access for inspection. The county wants several other things which the county is not in the habit of getting from people who do not have lawyers." She paused. She looked at him sidelong. "You will be the first person they apply it to." "Son." "I know. And the second. And the third." He nodded. She set down the cup. She folded her hands in her lap. The wedding ring caught the afternoon light, and for a moment the gold was the colour of the inside of a fire that had been banked for the night and had gone down to its last good red. "Will you go?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Will you speak? If I'm asked, will you raise your voice?" "No, ma'am." "Good," she said. "The men who shout in that room are the men who do not have anything to lose. The man who has already lost everything does not need to shout." He stood. Smokey stood with him. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. "You are welcome on this porch, hun," she said. "You do not need to bring water with you to come up, but the water is welcome too. Until I can fix the well, I will not pretend that it is not. What is wrong with the well?" "It went dry on the 3rd of last month. I have been hauling from town. I have not told my daughter in Phoenix because she will come up here in a rented car, and she will pack me up against my will, and she will move me into a place with a number on the door and a nurse who calls me by my first name. I would rather drink dust." He looked at her for a long second. "I will fix the well," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of cold water. "Son," she said, "the well is 140 feet down through basalt. The valley water table is dropping 6 inches a week. There is no fixing the well. There is only the spigot in the park and the jugs in my kitchen and the year I have left on this ground if the rain comes. If the rain does not come," he said. "Then I will not be the only one without a year left," she said, "and the men who have laughed at you for digging holes in the ground will be standing in front of the spigot in the park beside me, with their 50 gallons a day and their dignity already rationed away. And they will think about you, and they will think about what they could have built, and they will not say a word." He did not answer. He did not need to. He drove back down to the gate and turned out onto the county road and went home. And he spent the rest of the afternoon in the shop welding an inlet manifold for the 3rd cistern, and when the sun went down he ate a tin of cold beans on the porch with Smokey at his knee, and at 5:30 in the morning he was up and packing the truck for the courthouse meeting that was not for 14 hours, because he had learned a long time ago that the only way to walk into a room he did not want to be in was to be packed for it the night before. The Crawford County Courthouse was a square brick building of 3 stories with a pressed tin ceiling in the main hearing room that had been hammered in 1907 by a Norwegian out of La Grande, who had charged the county $600 for the work and had been paid in 3 installments over 4 years. The hearing room had been remodeled twice, badly, and the long benches had been replaced with folding metal chairs in 1984, and the fluorescent lights in the dropped ceiling buzzed at 60 hertz in the particular insistent way that older fluorescent fixtures buzz, the sound that, to a man who had spent any time in field hospitals, was almost the sound of home and almost the sound of a place a man should not stay in for very long. He arrived at 6:40. He sat at the back. Smokey was not allowed inside the building. He had left her in the truck with both windows down and a bowl of water on the floor of the cab. The truck was parked under the only mature tree in the courthouse lot. The room filled, Calloway came in, Roy Petrie came in, the young cattle hand came in, 3 of the women who worked at the diner came in, 2 ranchers from the upper benches, a woman from the Forest Service. Eleanor Briggs came in at 5 minutes to 7 and sat in the back row near the door, and she did not look at him. The county chair gavelled at 7:03. In the front row, in a clean white shirt and a pressed pair of dark wool trousers, and a watch that cost more than Jax's truck, sat a man Jax had not seen in town before. He was in his late 40s. He was lean. He had hair that had been cut at a shop that had charged him $85 for the cut. His name, Jax would learn within 10 minutes, was Garrett Voss. He was the principal of an LLC out of Boise that had been quietly acquiring water rights and small parcels in 3 eastern Oregon counties for the last 18 months. He was, as the meeting moved through its preliminaries, the man who introduced the proposed ordinance from his seat in the audience by thanking the chair for the opportunity to address concerns of public welfare in a moment of unprecedented water scarcity. Voss spoke for 9 minutes. He spoke well. He had been to law school somewhere. He had a way of using the word community in a sentence that made the word sound like a small, fragile object he was personally protecting from people who did not know how to hold it. He proposed a permit process. He proposed an inspection regime. He proposed an emergency authority for the county to access private storage above a threshold for distribution to vulnerable populations. He used the phrase vulnerable populations 4 times. He did not, at any point during the 9 minutes, look at Jax. When Voss sat down, the chair opened the floor for public comment. Roy Petrie stood. Roy Petrie spoke for 3 minutes about responsibility. Roy Petrie did not look at Jax either, but Roy Petrie said the words private hoard and unaccountable storage and a man on the rim with secrets, and the room understood who Roy Petrie meant. The chair recognized other speakers. 2 were in favor. 1 was opposed. 1 was incoherent. The chair recognized Jax Harlan. Jax stood. He did not walk to the front. He stood at his folding chair in the back row and spoke from there, because he was a man of few words, and few words did not need a podium. I have built 3 cisterns on 3 acres up the rim road, he said. The third is not finished. They are concrete. They are sealed. They are filled by rain off my roof and the diversion swales I have cut into the slope. They were paid for by my disability check and by the sale of the house I inherited from my father in 1996 when he died of a heart attack on a tractor. They are not for sale. They are not for trade. They are not, with respect to Mr. Voss, vulnerable to the procedural needs of the county, because the water in them belongs to the rain that fell on my roof, and it was no man's water until I caught it, and now it is mine. He sat down. The room was quiet. The chair tabled the proposed ordinance until the next regular session of the commission, 2 weeks out, pending further review and additional public comment. In the parking lot afterward, Garrett Voss came up to the truck where Jax was unlocking the door. Smokey was already on her feet in the passenger seat, the hackles along her shoulder blades not raised but ready, her amber eye fixed on the man who was walking across the gravel with both hands open and a smile that was supposed to be warm and was not. "Mr. Harlan," Voss said, "a word." "I'm listening." "I would like to make you an offer. Cash. Today. For your 3 acres and what is on it. I think you will find the number generous. I am not selling. The number is more than the parcel will appraise at in this market by a factor of 6. It is more than the parcel was worth in the wettest year of the last century. I am offering you a way to take care of yourself in a difficult season. I am offering you a way to walk away from a fight that, with respect, is not one you are going to win against the county. I am offering you a future that does not involve a folding chair in a hearing room. I am not selling," Jax said again. Voss held the smile. "I will give you my card," he said. "I will give you a week to think about it. After that, the offer comes off the table and the ordinance is going to pass on the second reading, and you're going to find that compliance is a much more expensive proposition than negotiation." He held out the card. Jax did not take it. Voss laid it on the hood of the truck. He turned. He walked away. Smokey's tail was not moving. The dog was watching Voss walk across the gravel with the absolute fixed concentration that the dog reserved for one of 2 things: a soldier or an enemy. And Voss was not a soldier. Jax got in the truck. He sat with both hands on the wheel for a long minute. Smokey pressed hard against his thigh from the passenger side, her ribs against his hip, her warm weight grounding him through the bone of the femur. His pulse came down. The buzz of the courthouse lights faded out of his sternum. He looked at the card on the hood through the windshield. A clean white card. Voss and Associates. Boise. Idaho. A phone number. An email. He started the truck. He pulled out of the lot. The card slid off the hood at the first turn and disappeared into the gravel of the courthouse parking lot. And he did not stop, and he did not look back. In the back row of the meeting hall, when he had been speaking, Eleanor Briggs had been sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her blue eyes fixed on him, and her chin lifted very slightly the way a woman lifts her chin when she is hearing something she has been waiting a long time to hear. Jax had not looked at her. He had not needed to. He drove home with the windows down. The night air off the rim was cold and smelled of dust and juniper smoke from somebody's chimney 3 miles down the draw. Smokey's head was on his thigh. The road climbed in long, slow switchbacks toward the dark line of his own gate, and somewhere far above the rim, a single owl crossed the headlights of the truck and was gone. The drought sharpened the way a knife sharpens, slowly against a stone, in steady strokes that did not sound like anything urgent until you ran your thumb along the edge and found that the edge had gone past sharp into something else. The Crawford River went below its historical low on a Wednesday. The Forest Service closed the lower campgrounds on a Friday. The county put a burn ban on every kind of fire, including the small enclosed fire pits on private property, which made the old men at the diner shake their heads. Because the old men at the diner remembered when a man could burn his own slash on his own ground, and the county could mind its own business. 2 of the wells on the lower benches went to sucking air the second week of May. By the end of the month, 4 more had failed. The line at the spigot in Veterans Park grew from 14 people to 26. The metered allowance dropped from 100 gallons per household to 75. The Forest Service began trucking water in from the John Day Reservoir for cattle on the federal allotments because the stock tanks were going dry. Eleanor's well had been dead for 6 weeks by then. Jack's had been hauling to her every other day, 200 gallons in a pair of polyethylene tanks lashed in the bed of the truck, pumped from the first cistern through a small 12-volt transfer pump he had wired up off the truck's battery. He had also been pumping water from his own holding tank to the small kitchen garden behind her house, where she had insisted on keeping 6 tomato plants and a bed of bush beans alive against the season, because, she said, a person without a tomato plant was not really a person, and the season would be the season she chose, not the one the sky was offering. The note appeared on his gatepost on a Tuesday morning. "Go home," the note said, in block letters in black Sharpie on the back of a torn-down weather flyer. The word home had been underlined 3 times with such pressure that the marker had gone through the paper. He stood at the gatepost in the cold dawn with the note in his hand and Smokey beside him reading the air, her nostrils working, her ears cycling through the small adjustments she made when she was trying to identify a recent presence by scent. She did not bristle, she did not growl. She simply looked at the gravel of the road in both directions and then looked up at him, and the look in her amber eye was the look of a working dog who had registered an intrusion and filed it for future reference and would, the next time the intruder came within range, be the first to know. He folded the note. He put it in his back pocket. He walked back up the gravel cut to the cabin. He fed the wood stove. He poured coffee. He sat on the edge of the cot for a long minute with both hands around the cup and counted his breathing. Go home. The word had a particular cruelty to a man without one. He did not need anyone to explain it. He did not tell Eleanor about the note. He did not tell anyone about the note. He went into town that afternoon for a length of 1-inch poly pipe, and Mort Calloway, behind the counter, looked at him for 2 full seconds before he rang the order, and Mort Calloway said low, in the voice he used only for the men he had decided were owed a kind of slow respect, "You have had any visitors up there?" "A note," Jack said. Mort nodded. Mort did not look surprised. "Be careful, son." Mort said, "There is talk. The talk is not from anyone you would have thought it was from. Mr. Voss." Mort did not say yes. Mort did not say no. Mort wrote up the order on the ticket pad and slid the carbon copy across the counter without looking at Jax's face. "Tuesday is the next commission meeting," Mort said. "The ordinance is on the agenda for the second reading. There has been a lot of phone calls made about your ground in the last 2 weeks. There has been a man from the state down at the Mule 3 nights running, buying drinks for anybody who will tell a story about a man who lives up the rim in a hole he dug himself." Jax looked at Mort for a long second. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. Mort Calloway, 58 years after he had carried a rifle in a country whose name he never said out loud anymore, looked Jax Harlan in the eye and said, "Because nobody told me." That is why." Jax nodded. He picked up the carbon. He went out. The next morning, the gate had been pulled off its hinges, not destroyed, just unbolted at the bottom and laid down in the dirt. A small, clear message. Anybody could come in. The ground was not. Finally, his. He spent 2 hours rehanging the gate with new bolts and a new hasp. Smokey sat on the porch and watched the road. She did not move from the porch for the entire 2 hours. Her ears were forward. Her amber eye scanned the long flat between his gate and the county road every 14 seconds, the way a working dog runs a quartering pattern with her head when there is no ground for her feet to run. He finished the gate. He went up to the cabin. He sat down at the small kitchen table and laid out his maps and his receipts and his dig logs and his cement orders and the carbon copies of every check he had written for the cisterns since the spring of the year before last, and he began to assemble, page by page, the file he was going to need for the next commission meeting. He did not know yet that he would need more than the file. He did not know yet that the file alone would not be enough. The emergency water meeting was called for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening at the Crawford County Courthouse. In addition to the regular Tuesday session, the chair issued a public notice. The notice said that in light of the rapid deterioration of the regional water situation and in advance of the Tuesday vote on the proposed ordinance, the Commission would hold an open emergency session for the purpose of receiving public comment on the immediate water needs of Crawford County residents. The notice was read on the radio. The notice was posted at the post office and the diner and the Chevron and the two churches. By the morning of the Thursday meeting, Jax had not slept more than 3 hours a night for 9 consecutive nights. He had lost 6 pounds. His beard had begun to go grey at the corners of the chin in a way it had not gone grey a month before. Smokey had not left him alone for more than the length of a single trip into town, and she had begun, in the evenings, to lie not at the foot of his cot but on the slab beside it, her ribs touching his ribs through the canvas of the cot, breathing slow against his side until he slept. He arrived at the courthouse at 6:20. He parked the truck under the only mature tree in the lot. He left both windows down for Smokey. He set a stainless bowl of water on the floor of the cab. He told the dog, in the small breath of a word he had used for 14 years, "Hold." She sat. She watched him walk across the gravel toward the courthouse steps. Her amber eye did not leave his back. The portable diesel generator was already running in the side lot beside the courthouse, set up to power the overflow speakers and the additional lighting for the expected overflow crowd. The generator was a 6-kilowatt yellow Honda on a steel frame. It was running at 63 decibels at the operator's distance and throwing off the particular waveform of harmonic rumble and metallic high frequency that all small diesel generators threw, and as Jax walked across the lot, the harmonic met his sternum at the exact resonance frequency that had lived in the HESCO barrier generator at the forward operating base outside Sangin in the September of his last deployment. The smell came up out of the air. Diesel exhaust, hot metal, the cooling iron of an exhaust manifold, the faint ozone of a portable alternator. He stopped walking. He was 30 feet from the courthouse steps. He was 11 feet from the generator. The fluorescent light from the courthouse windows came down through the dry air in the long, cold blue cast of a forward operating base in a valley in Helmand at 0400 on the morning of the convoy. The radio was in his earpiece. The radio was saying something. The world was about to come apart. He counted. Boots. Concrete. Dry grass at the edge of the lot. The truck under the tree. The dog in the cab. His hands. His breath. He closed his eyes once, briefly, and reopened them. The lot was a county lot. The generator was a county generator. The fluorescent light was an Oregon light. The year was the year. He was 41 years old, and he was standing in a parking lot in Crawford, Oregon. And there was no convoy, and there was no radio, and there was no morning, and the air that smelled of diesel was about to be blown off by the small, steady wind that had begun to rise off the rim. He counted Smokey's breathing from across the lot. He could not actually hear her. The lot was 60 feet across. The generator was loud, but he could see the dog through the open passenger window of the truck. She was sitting up. Her ears were forward. Her amber eyes were on him. Her flanks moved in the slow, even rhythm that meant she was reading him from 60 feet away with the absolute precision that working dogs use to read a handler at distance, and she had registered, before he had registered it himself, that he had stopped walking and that he had stopped because of the generator, and that he was going to need her in the next 90 seconds or he was not going to make it through the door. She came out of the truck without being called. She did not bark, she did not run. She came across the lot in the slow, controlled trot of a working dog moving to a downed handler in a noise environment, and she crossed the gravel in 11 seconds and pressed her shoulder hard against the back of his right knee and stood there, and Jax, without looking down, dropped his right hand to the top of her head and laid his palm flat across the broad bone of her skull, and counted her breathing against the small bones of his palm. 8 breaths. Steady. Deep. He counted his own breath against hers. 6, 7, 8. The Sangin morning thinned out. The radio went silent. The convoy did not roll. The fluorescent light became a courthouse light. The generator became a yellow Honda on a steel frame. The smell of diesel thinned in the rising wind off the rim. And the year was the year, and the lot was the lot. And the man in the lot was a man who had not died in Helmond, and was not going to die in Crawford. He took 6 more breaths. He looked down at the dog. She looked up at him. "Good girl," he said, very quietly. The words were the only words he had spoken aloud to her in 3 days. Her tail moved once against the gravel. He turned and walked her back to the truck. Dogs were not allowed inside the courthouse. He opened the cab door. She jumped up. He set her bowl back down. He filled it again from the gallon jug he kept on the floor. "Hold," he said. She lay down on the bench seat with her chin on the seam of the leather and her amber eye on the courthouse door, and she did not move. He turned and walked across the lot and up the courthouse steps and through the heavy oak doors, and he did not look back. He did not need to. The dog would still be on the bench seat when he came out. The dog had been there at the last breath of the worst night he had ever had at Walter Reed, and the dog had been there at the worst minute of the worst week of the worst year of his life when the certified letter had come, and the dog would be there when the meeting was over, whatever was on the other side of the meeting. In his back pocket was the folded note from his gatepost. In his right inside coat pocket was the file he had been building for 9 days. In his left inside coat pocket was a small spiral pad with 3 pages of notes he had written at the kitchen table at 4 in the morning. In his head was the breath count and the boot count and the dog's breath. And inside that, behind that, underneath that, was the cold, quiet calculation of a man who had been given another reason not to walk away tonight. And the reason was sitting in the back row of the meeting hall in a green field jacket 2 sizes too big for her shoulders. He walked the long fluorescent corridor toward the hearing room. The buzz of the lights had been the buzz he had carried out of 3 field hospitals and into a dozen civilian buildings since, and the buzz was a thing he could now hear without folding, because the dog had pressed against his knee in the lot and reset the count, and a man with the count reset could walk down a courthouse hallway under fluorescent light without being unmade by it. The hearing room was full when he came in, standing room only. The folding chairs had been doubled. The pressed tin ceiling caught the light and threw it back down across the room in the cold blue wash of a building that had not been remodelled correctly. Voss was in the front row in a clean white shirt. Roy Petrie was 3 rows back, his cup of coffee from the diner already cold. Mort Calloway was in the second row near the wall, his hands folded on his lap, his eyes on the chair. The chair gavelled at 7:04. In the back row, Eleanor Briggs was already sitting. She had walked in earlier. She had walked in alone. She was wearing Tom's old field jacket, the one she had been wearing the day Jax had first seen her on the gravel shoulder of County Road 14, the one that hung past her hips, the one that had been a man's jacket once and was a widow's jacket now. The cuffs were still rolled to her elbows. Her grey hair was pulled back into the same knot at the nape of her neck. The knot had come loose at one strand. The strand had fallen along her temple. She had not put it back. She was very pale. Her hands rested on her knees. Her hands did not shake yet. They would in 28 minutes. But not yet. The chair began the meeting. The chair was a man named Holcomb who had been a school principal for 31 years before he had retired and stood for the county commission, and he was a fundamentally decent man who was, on this particular Thursday evening, in over his head. He read the agenda, he explained the procedure, he thanked the public for coming. He invited the principal proponent of the proposed emergency authority to address the room. Garrett Voss stood up from the front row. He was wearing the same clean white shirt he had worn at the previous meeting, with a pair of dark trousers and a tie the colour of dust, and he carried a leather portfolio under his left arm. And he walked to the lectern at the front of the room with the specific calm of a man who had spent a great deal of money on the appearance of calm. He thanked the chair, he thanked the commissioners, he thanked the citizens of Crawford County. He used the word community 3 times in the first 90 seconds. He laid out the case. He used a small foldable chart. He cited 4 reports from a state water resources document. He said the words shared resource and emergency authority and proportional contribution and equitable access. He did not say the word seizure. He did not say the word confiscation. He did not need to. The room understood what he was asking for. He spoke for 14 minutes. When he sat down, the chair opened the floor. The first to speak was a rancher from the upper benches who said he was tired of listening to people who did not run cattle tell other people who did run cattle how to handle their own water. He sat down to applause. The second was a woman who worked at the diner who said she had 3 kids and a husband on dialysis, and she was carrying jugs from the spigot every other day. And if there was water in any cistern in this valley that could be put toward the dialysis machine of a man who had voted in every election since 1986, then by God she did not see why a single man on a piece of useless ground should be allowed to keep it under lock and key. She sat down to applause. She did not look at Jax. She had not, Jax recognized, been told by anyone who had been doing the talking around her that the cistern she was speaking of had been hauling 200 gallons every other day to a widow up the road from her own house for 6 weeks. The third was a man from the post office who said he was for the ordinance. The fourth was Roy Petrie. Roy Petrie had been waiting for this moment for 19 months. Roy Petrie stood up at his folding chair. Roy Petrie did not walk to the lectern. Roy Petrie spoke from where he stood, the way a man speaks who knows he has the room already. "I want to know," Roy Petrie said, "who has been hauling water down off that rim in the back of a truck in the middle of the night." The room moved, a small movement. A turning. Voss did not turn. Voss looked at his hands. "I want to know," Roy Petrie said, "who has a cistern up there that nobody has measured, who has water that the rest of us do not, who has been telling who up at that cabin who is allowed to drink and who is not. We have been talking about emergencies in this county for 8 weeks. We have been listening to lectures from a man in a clean shirt. We have been pretending we do not know what is on the rim. The man on the rim is not a hero. The man on the rim is sitting in this room. The man on the rim is hoarding water in a country that is dying. I want to know how the law is going to address that." Roy Petrie sat down. The room was very quiet. The chair cleared his throat. The chair said, "I would remind the speakers that this is a session for public comment on the proposed emergency authority, and not for individual." "Mr. Chair," Voss said. From his seat, the chair stopped. Voss stood again. He did not return to the lectern. He stood at his front row chair and said, very softly, that he understood that emotions in the room ran high, and that the proposed emergency authority was precisely intended to address the kind of inequity Mr. Petrie had spoken of, and that he would yield the floor for any further public comment before the commission moved to its consideration. He sat down. In the back row, Eleanor Briggs raised her hand. The chair did not see her. The chair was looking at the front of the room. The chair recognized 2 more speakers. Both spoke for the ordinance. Both spoke without using Jax's name, and both spoke about him for the entire duration of their remarks. Eleanor Briggs raised her hand again. Mort Calloway saw her. Mort Calloway said, "Low," into the silence after the second speaker sat down. "Mr. Chair." Mort Calloway raised one square hand. Mort Calloway pointed to the back of the room. "Mr. Chair." Mrs. Briggs has been holding her hand up. The chair turned. The chair saw her. "Mrs. Briggs," the chair said. The chair recognizes Mrs. Briggs. Eleanor Briggs put her hands on the arms of the folding chair. She pushed herself up. She came to her feet slowly. The folding chair scraped 1/2 inch on the linoleum behind her. She steadied herself with her right hand on the back of the chair in front of her. The cuffs of Tom's old field jacket were rolled to her elbows. Her grey hair was coming loose at the temple. Her face was the colour of old paper. She did not walk to the lectern. She spoke from where she stood. 41 years ago, she said, "My husband and I came to Crawford Valley with 3 children and $1,000 and a 1954 Massey Ferguson tractor that was older than the youngest of us, and we built a life on 5 acres on the lower bench because there was no other ground we could afford. We were not from here. We were from nowhere. We came because Tom had a brother who had told him the rim country was a place a man could disappear into and put down a quiet life if he was tired of the loud one." The room had gone still. "Tom served 23 years, she said. 2 tours in Vietnam, 6 in Germany, 2 in the deserts. He came home in 1998 to start his second life. He died of cancer 2 years and 4 months ago. The cancer came out of a burn pit in a place he never told me the name of. I do not blame the country for the cancer. I blame the burn pit. Those are different things. The country I do not blame." She paused. Her hand on the chair in front of her did not move. The chair recognized that she was speaking and gave her the room. "I have been living on 5 acres without a working well for 46 days, Eleanor Briggs said. The well went dry on the 3rd of last month. I did not tell my daughter. I did not tell the county. I did not ask anybody for anything. I have been hauling jugs from the spigot like a 40-year-old in 1934. And I have been doing it on my own 2 feet because that is the way I was raised, and that is the way Tom was raised. And there are some things that we do not give up, and one of them is the way we get our own water." She paused again. "For 43 of those 46 days," she said, "a man in this room has been hauling water to my house in the back of his truck without my asking, and without my paying, and without my permission. I told him not to. He did it anyway. The first time he came up the gravel, he set a jug on my porch and walked off. He did not knock. He did not tell anybody. He has not, to my knowledge, told a single person in this room that he has been keeping a widow's tomato plants alive for the last 6 weeks, while the rest of you have been busy explaining why his cisterns are an offence against the public welfare." The room was very quiet. "His name is Jax Harlan," Eleanor Briggs said. "He served 12 years in the United States Army. He carried a rifle in 2 countries. He was wounded in the 3rd. The German Shepherd that everyone in this town has seen in the bed of his truck for the last 2 years is a retired military working dog. The dog and the man came home together because the man would not come home without the dog. The dog has a piece of metal in her left foreleg that I have looked at because I have been a nurse for 30 years, and I asked. The man has a piece of metal in his shoulder. They came back from the same place." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "What you're doing in this room tonight," Eleanor Briggs said, "is not a discussion about water. It is a discussion about the kind of country we want to be when the water runs out. A man on the rim has built a thing that has kept a 72-year-old widow alive for 6 weeks, while the county was figuring out a permit process. A man in a clean white shirt in the front row has been buying up water rights at distress prices in 3 counties for 18 months. And has been paying men in this room to carry stories back to him about a man on the rim who—" She stopped. Her right hand moved off the back of the chair in front of her. It moved an inch. It moved 2 inches. It came down to her side, and it was shaking. A small, fine shaking. The kind a body makes when the body has reached the end of what it has agreed to do for the day. Her knees moved. They did not buckle yet. They moved. "The man in the clean white shirt has been buying." She did not finish the sentence. Her right hand reached for the back of the chair in front of her again and missed it. Her left hand came up. Her left hand also missed. Her knees folded. She went down. She went down slow. The folding chair behind her caught the back of her thighs for half a second and folded with her. She did not hit the linoleum hard. Her shoulder struck first. Her head turned. Her temple touched the floor on the soft pull of the long fall, and her eyes were already closed before her cheek met the linoleum. The room froze. For a fraction of a second, perhaps an entire second, perhaps 2, the room did not move, Voss did not turn, the chair did not stand up. The woman from the diner 3 rows up who had spoken about her husband on dialysis lifted one hand to her mouth and held it there. Roy Petrie, standing beside his folding chair, opened his mouth to say something and did not say it. The first thing that moved was a German Shepherd. She had come in at the back of the room without anybody noticing. She had come in through the heavy oak doors of the courthouse, which had been propped open by a brick because the air conditioning on the 2nd floor was failing, and the chair had asked for the doors to be left open for circulation, and she had come down the long fluorescent corridor on the soft pad of her nails on the linoleum, and she had come into the hearing room through the open inner double doors at the back, and she had stopped in the open doorway 4 feet behind Eleanor Briggs's folding chair, and she had been standing there for the last 4 minutes of Eleanor's remarks, with her head up and her ears forward and her amber eyes fixed on the back of the Greenfield jacket, because the moment Eleanor Briggs had stood up to speak, The small dry currents of air moving through the open doors had brought the dog the scent of an old military field jacket that had been Tom Briggs's jacket for 31 years and had carried, in the threads of its canvas, the deep mineral chemistry of one specific man's sweat and one specific issue of M1965 cotton nylon weave and one specific decade of Crawford Valley dust soaked into the fibers and the residue of one specific bottle of Hoppes No. 9 bore solvent that had spilled on the right cuff in 1992 and never come out. The dog had been trained, in another life, to find wounded soldiers in the chaos of a market street and a vehicle bomb and a press of bodies. The training had taken 2 years. The training had gone deeper than instinct. The dog had moved up the corridor and into the hearing room because the dog had recognized a soldier scent, and a soldier scent in the dog's training was a scent to be moved toward when the body bearing the scent had begun to falter. She had been waiting 4 minutes for Eleanor Briggs to fall. When Eleanor Briggs fell, the dog was already moving. She crossed 30 feet of crowded floor in 7 steps. She did not graze a single human leg. She wove through the folding chairs the way a sheepdog weaves through a pen, with the absolute spatial precision of a creature whose ancestors had been bred for 9,000 years, to move through a flock without disturbing a single member of it. She reached Eleanor Briggs before Eleanor Briggs's full weight had settled on the linoleum. She lowered herself across the upper body of the woman on the floor, the way a working dog had been trained to lower herself across the chest of a casualty, to keep the casualty awake, with her front paws on either side of the woman's right shoulder, her own chest pressed gently across the woman's collarbone, her muzzle laid alongside the woman's cheek, her warm breath moving into the woman's ear, her amber eyes open and steady and watching the room. The dog did not bark. The dog did not whine. The dog lay across the chest of Eleanor Briggs, the way she had lain across the chest of 3 different soldiers in 3 different countries, the way she had been taught, and she breathed her warm, steady working dog's breath into the ear of the woman on the floor, and the dog's tail moved once, slow, against the linoleum. Behind the dog, in the doorway, Jax Harlan stood frozen. He had not seen the dog leave the truck. He had been at his folding chair by the wall. The first thing he had seen was the dog crossing the floor. The first thing he had heard, after the silence of the room, was the small soft pad of Smokey's paws on the linoleum. He came across the room in 9 steps. He did not weave. He did not need to. The room cleared for him the way a crowd clears for a man who is moving toward a body. He went down on one knee beside Eleanor Briggs. He did not move the dog. He laid 2 fingers along the cord of Eleanor's neck below the angle of her jaw. He found the pulse. The pulse was there. It was thready and fast and irregular, and there. He laid the back of his other hand against her cheek. The cheek was hot and dry. The dehydration was profound. The body had been running on the small reserves for too many days. Smokey's amber eye moved. The dog's eye held his eye for a count of 2. Then the dog's eye returned to the room. The room around them began, finally, to move. The chair was up. The chair was calling for the EMTs. Somebody on the second row had a phone out. Somebody from the front row, a woman Jax did not know by name, came forward with a folded sweater and knelt and pushed it carefully under the back of Eleanor's head. The woman from the diner was crying. Mort Calloway was on his feet. Roy Petrie was standing in the row behind his own folding chair with both hands at his sides and a face that had emptied of everything that had been in it 10 minutes before. Voss was no longer in his seat. Jax did not look up to find him. Jax did not need to. The county EMTs were the volunteer crew based out of the Crawford Fire Hall, 4 blocks from the courthouse, and they came through the door of the hearing room in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, with a canvas stretcher and a kit bag, and the quiet efficiency of a small-town crew that had done this work for a long time. The senior medic was a woman of about 50 named Neela Reyes. She knelt beside Eleanor on the side opposite Jax. She looked at the dog. "It is okay if she stays." The medic said. "She stays," Jax said. The medic nodded. She and her partner worked around the dog. They placed an IV. They started saline. They placed a blood pressure cuff. They read the cuff. They read the pulse oximeter. They spoke to each other in the small, quiet code of a competent crew. They asked Jack's questions. He answered them. Last meal. Last drink of water. Any medications, any chronic conditions. He answered everything he could. The medic wrote it on the back of her left hand with a Sharpie because her clipboard had gone missing somewhere between the truck and the doorway, and there had been no time to find it. Through the entire process, Smokey did not move from the chest of Eleanor Briggs. She moved her front paws an inch each, on the medic's quiet instruction, to make room for the BP cuff. She moved her chest a fraction to allow the IV. She did not move further. Her breath continued to move into Eleanor's ear, slow, warm, steady. Her amber eye did not leave Eleanor's face. 2 minutes after the saline started, Eleanor's eyes opened. They opened slow. They were very pale. They focused, with effort, on the amber eye 6 inches in front of them. They held the amber eye. The cracked lips of Eleanor Briggs moved. She whispered, into the fur of Smokey's neck. 2 words. Tom's dog, she whispered. She closed her eyes again. She breathed. Slow, against the warm chest of the German shepherd lying across her collarbone. Tom's dog. The medic, on the other side of Eleanor's body, did not hear the words. She was reading the cuff. The medic's partner did not hear the words. He was setting up the second line. Mort Calloway. 10 feet away. Did not hear the words. Roy Petrie did not hear the words. Jax Harlan heard the words. Jax Harlan, kneeling on the linoleum of a county hearing room in a town in eastern Oregon at 7:38 on a Thursday evening in the worst drought of recorded history in the Upper Crawford watershed, heard the words. He did not understand them yet. He would, in 18 hours. But the dog had understood them 4 minutes before they had been spoken, the way the dog had understood a great many things in the long, quiet history of her partnership with the man who was now kneeling on the linoleum beside her. And the dog laid her muzzle against the cheek of the woman on the floor and breathed her warm, steady working dog's breath into the ear of Tom Briggs's widow. And the room around them, the whole hot, ugly, fluorescent room, the whole town of Crawford, the whole valley, was silent. The medics stabilized Eleanor on the floor for 9 minutes before they moved her. They did not move her until her pulse came down to the high 110s and her blood pressure came up off the floor. When they were ready to lift her to the stretcher, the medic touched the dog's shoulder very gently and said, "Sweetheart, can you give us a foot?" Smokey moved 1 foot. The medic smiled. Very briefly. In the small private way of a person who had been working with people and animals for 30 years, and who knew, in that smile, what she was looking at. They got Eleanor on the stretcher. They lifted the stretcher. They carried Eleanor out of the hearing room and down the corridor and out into the parking lot, and Smokey walked at Jax's heel beside the stretcher, and at the open back doors of the ambulance the medic turned to Jax and said, "You want to ride with her?" "Yes." "And the dog?" "Yes." The medic nodded. "Get in." He got in. The dog jumped up and turned twice and lay down between the stretcher and the bench in the small back compartment of the ambulance, with her body tucked against the footrail of the stretcher, and the doors closed, and the ambulance pulled out of the courthouse lot, and the long red and white wash of its lights swept across the empty hearing room behind them, where folding chairs sat empty, and a green field jacket lay across one of the chairs in the back row, where Eleanor Briggs had set it down before she rose to speak, and where, on the linoleum at the back of the room, the small clear circle of warmth that the dog's body had left on the cool floor was already fading. In the front row, the seat where Garrett Voss had been sitting at 7:04 was empty. The aftermath in Crawford that night went the way these things go in small towns. People stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes without leaving. Mort Calloway walked out to his truck and sat with his hands on the wheel for a long time before he drove home. Roy Petrie walked the long way back to his own pickup with the tin cup of cold diner coffee still in his hand, because he had forgotten he was holding it. The chair of the commission tabled the proposed ordinance indefinitely in a brief, broken voice from the lectern before he closed the meeting, and nobody objected. In the ambulance, Jax Harlan sat on the small bench beside the stretcher of an unconscious widow. with his hand on the warm flank of his dog, and he replayed, in his head, on the long ride to the small county hospital in John Day, the two words she had spoken into Smokey's fur on the floor of the hearing room: Tom's dog. Tom's dog? He did not yet know who Tom was, but the dog had known, somehow, before he had, and by the time the long red and white wash of the ambulance lights crossed the high desert into the headlights of the small county hospital at the edge of John Day, Oregon, at 23 minutes past 9 on a Thursday night, in the worst drought of recorded history, Jax Harlan had begun, in the back of his head, in the long quiet way that a soldier begins these things, to understand that he had been seen by somebody for longer than he had been aware of being seen, and that the seeing had come from a place that he had not yet learned to look toward. The small county hospital at the edge of John Day, Oregon, was a single-story brick building of 14 beds, 3 exam rooms, a small ER, a single ICU bay, and a flat roof that had been re-roofed in 1998 and was due to be re-roofed again. It served 3 counties. It was staffed at night by 2 nurses and a doctor who rotated in from Bend. The waiting room had 4 orange plastic chairs and a cork board with notices about flu shots and cattle auctions, and a missing tortoiseshell cat named Olive. Smokey was not allowed in the waiting room. The night nurse, a young man named Caleb, who had been a corpsman in the Navy before he had come home to John Day to go to nursing school, took one look at Jax's face and one look at the dog and said, "The room at the end of the hall by the linen closet has a door and a window. Bring her around the back. I will let you in." Smokey slept on the floor at Jax's feet in the back room with the linen closet for the 4 hours and 21 minutes that Eleanor Briggs was being stabilized in the ICU bay across the hall. Jax did not sleep. He sat in a metal folding chair with his back against the wall and his hand on the dog's spine, and he breathed against her breathing for the entire 4 hours and 21 minutes, and he did not move except once at 3:47. When Caleb came in with a paper cup of coffee and a foil-wrapped sandwich from the staff fridge, and Jax took the coffee and said, "Thank you," and Caleb nodded, and Caleb went back out. And Jax drank the coffee black and ate the sandwich and counted Smokey's breath until the dawn came up grey over the parking lot beyond the small window. The doctor came down the hall at 6:12. She was 61 years old. Her name was Dr. Marissa Henn. She had been driving up from Bend twice a week for 11 years. "She is stable," she told Jax. "She is conscious. She is dehydrated and the kidneys took a hit, and there is some myocardial strain we are watching. But she is going to come back from this. She is asking to see you. The dog too," he said. The doctor looked at the dog. She looked at Jax. She looked back at the dog. "Bring her," she said. The ICU bay was the third door on the left. Eleanor was propped up at 30 degrees in the narrow hospital bed. The IV line was in her left forearm. The cardiac monitor was on her chest. Her grey hair was loose on the pillow. Her eyes were open. Her face was the colour of paper that had been left in the sun and brought back inside, a faint warmth at the cheeks that had not been there at the courthouse. Jax came to the foot of the bed. Smokey came with him. Eleanor looked at the dog first. She raised her right hand, the one without the IV, and held it out. Smokey walked the 3 steps to the side of the bed. The dog laid her muzzle in the open palm. The hand closed gently on the long bones of the muzzle. Eleanor's eyes filled with water that did not fall. The water sat at the edge of the lashes and did not fall, and Eleanor said, very softly, "I am sorry, sweetheart. I would have known you anywhere." Jax stood at the foot of the bed. She turned her face toward him. "Sit, son," she said. There was a single chair beside the bed. He sat. She kept her hand on the dog's muzzle. "I have a thing I have been carrying for 2 years," she said. "I was going to give it to you the day I had the strength to. I almost did, 3 weeks ago, on the porch with the coffee. I did not, and I was wrong not to. I'm sorry." "Yes, ma'am. In the bag," she said. The brown bag on the chair by the door. There is a small wooden box. The box was Tom's. Will you bring it to me?" He stood. He went to the chair by the door. The brown canvas tote bag had been packed by somebody at the hospital from her field jacket pockets and the small clutch she had carried into the meeting. He lifted the tote. He set it on the foot of the bed. He found the wooden box. The box was the size of a hand. It was made of cherry, or what had once been cherry and had been darkened by 40 years of touch into a colour almost the colour of old blood. There was no lock. There was a small brass hasp that had gone green at the joint. The lid was inlaid with a single 5-pointed star of darker wood, and the star had been worn smooth at the points by the press of a man's thumb over decades. He gave her the box. She set it on her chest above the cardiac leads. She opened the hasp. She lifted the lid. Inside the box were letters. There were perhaps 60 of them, folded twice, stacked in 3 rows, the paper gone the colour of weak tea, the edges of the envelopes soft. The top envelope was an army green and was addressed in a man's slow, careful printing to Mrs. Eleanor Briggs at a rural box in Crawford, Oregon, postmarked an APO address Jax did not need to read to know the country. The handwriting was a sergeant's handwriting. The handwriting was a man who had been disciplined to write small and clear by an instructor at a basic course in 1976. She did not unfold the letters. She lifted the top letter. She moved a small piece of cardstock that had been resting beneath it. She handed Jax the cardstock. It was a photograph. The photograph was a 4x6 colour print, faded, the corners curled inward from years inside a wallet. It showed a Humvee at night, lit from behind by the green glow of a chemical light, with 3 men in front of it. The centre man was a master sergeant of perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper moustache, and a face that had been cut from the same hill country granite as 1,000 other senior NCOs of the United States Army, and his arm was around the shoulder of a younger sergeant in his early 30s with a dark beard and a ruck on the ground beside his right boot, and the younger sergeant was smiling, the small tight smile of a man who had just been told something by his master sergeant that had made him laugh for the first time in 11 days, and behind them, a German shepherd was sitting on her haunches at the back wheel of the Humvee with her ears forward and her amber eyes catching the green of the chem light, and on the bottom edge of the photograph somebody had written, in a man's slow, careful hand in blue ballpoint, Harlan, Briggs, and the famous Smoky, Sangin, Sept 14. Jax did not move. He held the photograph. He looked at it for a very long time. He had not seen this photograph in 14 years. He had taken his copy out of his footlocker the night before he had been medevaced out of theatre, and the copy had gone with him to Germany, and the copy had been in his wallet at Walter Reed, and the copy had been in the same wallet that Carla had taken from the dresser in the bedroom of the house in Vancouver, Washington, in the 2nd week of February 7 years ago, and the wallet had not come back and the photograph had been in it, and he had thought for 14 years that the photograph was gone forever. Tom Briggs. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs of Crawford, Oregon, had been the senior NCO of Jax Harlan's unit for the 17 months of the Helmand deployment that had ended in the September of his last year in theatre. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs had been the man on the radio at 0400 on the morning of the 23rd when the convoy had rolled out of the fob outside Sangin and had taken the IED at the Bend in the Wadi 6 miles north of the gate. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs had been the man who had pulled Jax Harlan out of the wreckage of the lead Humvee with his own hands and had dragged him 40 metres to the cover of a mud wall under fire with a piece of shrapnel in his own thigh that he had not stopped to address until Jax Harlan had been on a backboard with a saline line in him. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs had been the man whose face Jax had seen in the air above him as the morphine had taken hold and the helicopter had come in over the Wadi for the medevac. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs had been, in the 17 months before that morning, the closest thing to a father Jax Harlan had had since the heart attack on the tractor in 1996. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs had retired at 23 years and gone home to a small farm in eastern Oregon. Master Sergeant Thomas Briggs had died of a cancer that had come out of a burn pit in Helmand in the spring of the year before last. Jax Harlan had read the obituary in the Oregonian. He had not driven down for the funeral. He had told himself at the time that he had not had the truck for it. He had not had the truck for it. He had also not had the courage for it. Two things could be true. He had not known where Tom Briggs had been from. Tom had never told him. Tom had been a man who said the words home country and never named the country. Crawford Valley, Eleanor said. He looked at her over the photograph. Tom never told you, she said. He did not tell anybody where we lived. He said the name of the valley out loud one time in 23 years, and that was to the man at the recruiting office in 1976. He said it was bad luck to put the name of your home in the mouth of the country that had just sent you to a war. Jax could not speak. She watched him. I knew you the day you walked into Callaway's, she said. 2 years ago, April, you bought a galvanized stock tank and 4 80-pound bags of cement. You did not say 2 words to Mort. The dog was at the door. I was in the corner buying chicken feed. You did not see me. I saw you. I went home and I sat on the porch with a glass of water in my hand for 3 hours. I did not approach you. I did not write a letter. I did not knock on your gate. Tom had told me about you for 14 years, son. He had told me what you looked like the day he met you and what you looked like the day you came back from your first leave with the dog. He had told me about your hands. He had told me about the way you stood at parade rest with your weight on your right heel. He had told me about the dog. He had told me about every long night the two of you had not slept, and every short morning you had eaten cold beans out of a can on a rock outside a wire. He had told me about you for 14 years. The day you walked into Callaway's, I knew you the way I would have known my own son, if my own son had walked in. Jax could not speak. Tom said you would come to the rim, she said. He said it more than once. He said, Elle, that boy is going to come to a place he can disappear into. He said, Elle, that boy is going to need to disappear before he can come back. He said, Elle, when he comes, do not crowd him. Let him do his own work. He said, Elle, when he comes, you will know. She paused. I was waiting, Eleanor said. I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry I did not bring you a piece of cornbread the first month. I'm sorry I let you keep digging that hole alone. I told myself I was respecting Tom's instruction. I was. Partly. I was also frightened. I was frightened that if I came up to your gate I would not know what to say. I was frightened of seeing the boy he had written about turn out to be a man I did not know how to talk to. I was frightened that if I let myself love you the way Tom had loved you, I would not be able to bear losing you a second time. She lifted her hand from the dog's muzzle. She held the hand out across the bed, palm up. He laid his right hand in hers. Her hand was thin and cool, and it held his hand. I have been wrong. Son, she said. I'm sorry. He bowed his head. He did not cry. He did not need to cry. He breathed in, slow, and breathed out, slow, and held the hand of the widow of the man who had pulled him out of the wreckage of the lead Humvee in the Wadi outside Sangin in the September of his last deployment. And Smokey stood with her muzzle on the edge of the hospital bed and her amber eyes open, and her tail moved twice against the linoleum. He stayed in the chair beside her bed for the rest of the morning. She slept a great deal. She woke twice. The first time she said in the bag, the small white envelope. He found the envelope. It contained a folded sheet of paper, photocopied, gone soft at the folds. He opened it. It was a county property assessor's bulletin of recent water rights transfers in Crawford County, with 7 lines highlighted in yellow. All 7 were transfers to a single LLC out of Boise. The LLC was Voss & Associates. 3 of the parcels were on the lower bench within a mile of the Briggs property. 1 was the parcel directly across the road. He had paid prices in 3 of the 7 that were 41 cents on the dollar of pre-drought market value. The second time she woke, she said in the bag, the recorder. He found the recorder. It was a small handheld digital recorder that her late husband had used during the last 3 years of his life to dictate letters because the cancer had taken the fine motor control of his right hand. She had charged it. She had carried it in her pocket to a meeting in her own driveway 6 weeks before, when a man in a clean white shirt had come up the gravel cut at noon on a Tuesday and had stood under the cottonwood and had made her, in his patient, quiet voice, An offer for the parcel and the water rights that had been generous and conditional. The condition being that she signed by the end of the week, the implication being that the well in her yard, which had been failing for 2 months by then, was going to fail completely on its own without his help, and that the moment it failed, the parcel would be worth a great deal less, and that she should, as a matter of common sense, take the offer he was making while the offer was still on the table. The conversation was 9 minutes long. The recorder had captured all of it. By 11 that morning, Jax had a copy of the recording on his phone. By 11:30, he had a second copy on a thumb drive in the glove compartment of the truck. By noon, he had emailed a copy to a Marine sergeant he had served with in the years between his second and third deployments, who was now a paralegal in an attorney's office in Bend, Oregon, with a single line of text: "Need counsel, not urgent today, urgent Tuesday." The next county commission meeting was the following Tuesday. He walked into the meeting at 6:40. He sat in the back row. The folding chair where Eleanor Briggs had been sitting the previous Thursday was empty. The chair gavelled at 7:03. Garrett Voss was not in the front row. Voss was 3 rows back, on the side, with a leather portfolio under his arm and a face that had been arranged with care. The chair recognised public comment. Jax stood up. He walked to the lectern. He laid the manila folder on the lectern. He opened it. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He laid out, page by page, the receipts of his own cisterns, the certifications, the tested water samples from a state-licensed lab in Bend, the diagrams of the diversion swales and the inflow manifolds and the dome reinforcement. He laid out the water rights transfer record from the assessor's office with the 7 highlighted lines. He laid out the LLC formation papers of Voss and Associates and the 3 pending purchase contracts that had been filed publicly with the county clerk. He played on a small Bluetooth speaker plugged into his phone the 9-minute recording from Eleanor Briggs's driveway. He did not play all 9 minutes. He played 4. 4 was enough. He turned off the recorder. He looked up at the chair. He looked at the commissioners. He did not look at Voss. "I'm asking," he said, "that the proposed emergency authority be permanently withdrawn from the agenda of this commission. I am asking that the records I have laid out tonight be entered into the public minutes of this meeting. I'm asking that the commission send a copy of the recording I have just played to the office of the Oregon Attorney General in Salem and to the Crawford County District Attorney for review. That is what I'm asking." He sat down. The room was very quiet. The chair looked at the commissioners. The commissioners looked at each other. In the 3rd row, Garrett Voss stood up. He walked, without speaking, to the side aisle. He walked, without speaking, to the back of the room. He went out through the heavy oak doors. The doors swung closed behind him on the small brass spring that had been adjusted by a hand a long time ago. He did not return to Crawford. His 3 pending purchase contracts on the lower bench were withdrawn the following week. The LLC dissolved within 90 days. The 7 previous transfers became, over the next 8 months, the subject of a slow, quiet investigation that did not make the front page of any newspaper, because nothing in Eastern Oregon ever did, but that ended, in the fullness of time, with 3 of the 7 being unwound by the parties involved and the principal of Voss and Associates, whose name was Garrett Voss, declining to be interviewed by any reporter who called. In the courthouse parking lot after the meeting, Mort Calloway came up to the truck where Jax was unlocking the door. Mort did not speak. Mort held out his right hand. Jax took it. The 2 men stood in the gravel of the lot, in the cold blue spill of the courthouse lights, and shook hands once. Firmly. Briefly. Mort Calloway nodded. Mort Calloway turned. Mort Calloway walked back to his own truck. In the passenger seat of Jax's truck, Smokey was waiting on the bench with her amber eye on the courthouse door. When Jax climbed in, the dog's tail moved against the upholstery in the small, steady cadence she had used for 14 years to mean, "You are home." He started the engine. He drove the long road home with his hand on the back of her neck, and the windows half down, and the cold spring air off the rim moving through the cab. In the back seat of the truck, in a brown canvas tote bag, sat the small wooden box from the chair in Eleanor Briggs's hospital room. She had pressed it into his hands an hour before he had driven down to Crawford. She had said, "Take it, son. He left these letters to me. The letters are mine. But the photograph is yours. So is the rest of what is in there. He had told me before he died that if you ever came to the valley, I was to give you the things in this box that he had been keeping for you for 14 years. Take it home. Read them when you're ready. There is no hurry." He waited 14 years. He can wait a little longer. He drove the 11 miles up the rim road in the dark. He did not open the box that night. He set it on the small kitchen table inside the cabin door. He fed the wood stove. He poured a cup of coffee. He sat on the edge of the cot for a long minute. Smokey lay down on the slab beside him with her ribs against his ribs. He did not open the box that night. He would in the morning, he would, slowly over the next 4 mornings, open the letters one at a time, in the order Tom Briggs had folded them, and read them at the small kitchen table by the light through the salvaged window over the stove, with Smokey on her cot at his feet, and a fresh cup of coffee at his elbow, and the long flat of the high desert outside going from dawn to noon, while the words of a master sergeant who had been dead for 2 years and 4 months reached across the distance that death had opened up between 2 men who had once stood beside each other in a wadi outside Sangin in the September of the year, that had broken one of them and the other. That would come later. That night, in the small concrete block cabin he had built himself on 3 acres of useless ground above Crawford Valley in eastern Oregon, in the worst drought of recorded history, on the Tuesday after the night, a German shepherd had crossed 30 feet of crowded floor to lie across the chest of a widow in a green field jacket. Jax Harlan sat on the edge of his cot with his hand on the warm spine of his dog, and he counted her breathing, and his own. And for the first time in 7 years, he did not have to count alone to be sure it was happening. 6 months later, the first hard rain of the new water year came on a Tuesday in late October, slow and steady out of the south, and ran for 3 days into the lined throats of the cisterns until all 4 of them were sitting full at the edge of his 3 acres. The 4th had been finished in August. Its dome had been raised by Jackson, a marine paralegal from Bend, who had driven up for a long weekend, with 3 cases of Coors Banquet and a willingness to hold a length of rebar steady for 16 hours. On the morning the rain stopped. Jax was at the lip of where the 5th cistern would go, marking the corners with surveyor stakes. The ground was dark. The juniper smelled green for the first time in 2 years. Smokey was at his right knee. Down the rim road, 1/2 a mile to the east, the small white frame house with the wraparound porch was just visible through the gap in the cottonwoods, and on the porch a thin grey-haired woman in a chambray work shirt sat in her rocking chair with a blue china cup steady in both hands and watched the rim go gold in the morning light. He drove the first stake. Smokey's tail moved twice against the back of his calf. He did not say anything. There was no one to say it to. And there was no one who needed it said. Some things are done with the body, in the open weather, on a piece of useless ground that a man bought because no one else wanted it. The rest is silence and rain. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.
The Heroic Veteran Dogs is a fictional channel created to entertain, educate, and inspire the audience by exploring the deep, loyal bond between veterans and their dogs. All channel content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is entirely coincidental.